It was just another Tuesday evening when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I certainly wasn't prepared for what would unfold over the next few hours. You know those moments that completely shift your perception of someone you thought you knew? This was definitely one of those nights. Let me take you back to the beginning to set the scene properly. I was lounging in my apartment, wearing my favorite worn-out sweatpants and a faded t-shirt from a concert I attended years ago. My hair was disheveled, and I had just settled into that perfect groove on my couch, ready to binge-watch the latest season of that show everyone had been talking about. The soft glow of my string lights created a cozy atmosphere, and I had just opened a bottle of wine, treating myself to a midweek indulgence after a particularly stressful day at work. I should probably introduce myself a bit. I'm Alex, a 28-year-old graphic designer living in the city. I came out when I was 19, during my sophomore year of college. It wasn't particularly dramatic. My parents were supportive, if a bit confused at first, and most of my friends either already suspected or simply took it in stride. Over the years, I've built a comfortable life for myself, with a close circle of friends from various backgrounds. I've dated here and there, had a couple of serious relationships, but nothing that has stuck for the long haul. I'm content with my life, though sometimes the loneliness creeps in during moments like these, quiet Tuesday evenings with just me, my thoughts, and whatever's streaming on Netflix. The unexpected visitor at my door that evening was Ryan. We've been friends since college. He lived across the hall from me in the dorms our freshman year. Ryan is the epitome of what most would consider conventionally attractive, tall with broad shoulders, dark hair that always seems perfectly tousled, and the kind of smile that lights up his entire face. He played baseball in college, and while he's no longer competing, he still maintains that athletic build. Ryan works in finance, always dressed impeccably in tailored suits during the week, though that night he showed up in jeans and a simple Henley that somehow made him look even more handsome than usual. Our friendship has always been easy, despite our different backgrounds and interests. Ryan grew up in a conservative household in a small town, while I was raised by liberal parents in the suburbs. He loves sports and action movies. I prefer art exhibitions and indie films. Yet somehow, we found common ground in our shared sense of humor and our love for trying new restaurants around the city. Over the years, we've maintained our friendship through regular hangouts, group activities with mutual friends, and the occasional deep conversation over drinks. Ryan has always been supportive of my sexuality, never making it an issue, though we rarely discussed it in depth. He's had several girlfriends over the years, typically gorgeous, accomplished women who seemed perfect for him on paper, though none of the relationships lasted more than a few months. When I opened the door that Tuesday evening, Ryan stood there with a six-pack of my favorite craft beer and that characteristic grin of his. "Hey, got time for an old friend?" he asked, as if we hadn't just had lunch together the previous week. There was something different about him, though, a slight nervousness behind his smile, an unusual hesitancy in his normally confident demeanor. "Just thought we could hang out and talk," he added, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I welcomed him in, of course. Our friendship had always been the kind where spontaneous visits were appreciated rather than intrusive. As he stepped into my apartment, I noticed he seemed more aware of his surroundings than usual, taking in the details of my living space as if seeing it for the first time, despite having been there countless times before. I cleared some magazines from the coffee table to make room for the beer, quickly shoving some dirty laundry under the couch with my foot, a futile attempt at last-minute tidying. "So, what brings you to my humble abode on a Tuesday night?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light despite the curiosity bubbling up inside me. Ryan wasn't typically the type to show up unannounced, especially midweek. He was structured, organized, the kind of person who scheduled social activities days in advance and always arrived precisely on time. This spontaneous visit felt out of character, and I couldn't help but wonder what prompted it. "Nothing specific," he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Work's been crazy. Needed to decompress with someone who doesn't want to talk about market trends or investment portfolios." He settled onto my couch, opening two beers and handing one to me. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and I noticed him linger for just a moment longer than necessary. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just my imagination playing tricks on me, a hazard of being a single gay man with an attractive straight friend. The first hour of conversation flowed easily, as it always did between us. We discussed the usual topics: work frustrations, mutual friends, the latest movies we'd seen. Ryan told me about a difficult client who was driving his entire team crazy with unreasonable demands. I shared stories about my creative director's impossible deadlines. We laughed about our friend Mike's disastrous attempt at cooking for his new girlfriend, which ended with a small kitchen fire and an embarrassing call to the fire department. It was comfortable, familiar territory. But as we moved from beer to the bottle of whiskey I kept for special occasions, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Ryan's posture changed. He leaned in more when I spoke, maintained eye contact for longer periods, and seemed to find reasons to decrease the physical space between us. When he laughed at one of my jokes, his hand briefly rested on my knee before quickly withdrawing. These were the kinds of subtle signals I'd learned to recognize over years of navigating the dating world. But coming from Ryan, they left me confused and slightly on edge. I found myself analyzing every interaction, second-guessing my interpretations. Was I reading too much into innocent gestures? Was I projecting my own buried feelings onto his actions? Because the truth was, I had harbored a crush on Ryan during our early college years. It was the classic gay cliché, falling for the straight best friend, and I had worked hard to move past those feelings, to appreciate our friendship for what it was rather than what it could never be. I'd been successful, for the most part. Those old feelings had faded into a distant memory, something I could look back on with a mixture of amusement and mild embarrassment. Or at least, that's what I told myself. As the night progressed, our conversation gradually shifted from light-hearted banter to more meaningful topics. Ryan asked me about my last relationship, a 6-month romance with a photographer named Ethan that had ended amicably when he received a job offer overseas. I shared the ups and downs of that relationship, the things I'd learned about myself through it. Ryan listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that surprised me with their depth and insight. "How did you know?" he asked suddenly, interrupting my story about Ethan's farewell party. The question hung in the air between us, ambiguous, yet somehow loaded with meaning. "Know what?" I responded, though I suspected I understood what he was asking. "That you were gay," he clarified, his voice dropping slightly as if sharing a secret. "Was it something you always knew, or was there a moment when it just clicked?" It wasn't the first time someone had asked me this question, but it was the first time Ryan had expressed such direct curiosity about my sexuality. I took a sip of whiskey, gathering my thoughts before responding. I explained that for me, it had been a gradual realization rather than a sudden epiphany. Throughout my teenage years, I'd noticed my attention drifting toward male classmates while my friends discussed their crushes on girls. I described the confusion, the period of denial, and finally, the relief that came with acceptance. It wasn't one moment, I told him. It was 1,000 tiny moments that eventually became impossible to ignore. Ryan nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the glass in his hands. "I've always wondered what that's like," he said. "To have such clarity about yourself, to know exactly who you are and what you want." There was something wistful in his tone, a hint of envy or perhaps longing that caught me off guard. "Trust me, it wasn't clarity at first," I laughed. "It was years of confusion before I figured things out. And even now, I don't always know what I want." I paused, studying his expression. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." Ryan shrugged, but the gesture seemed forced, too casual to be genuine. "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe I've been thinking about some things lately. About identity, about the boxes we put ourselves in." My heart rate quickened at his words. Was this conversation heading where I thought it might be? I tried to keep my expression neutral, not wanting to jump to conclusions or make assumptions that might make Ryan uncomfortable. "What kind of boxes are you thinking about?" I asked carefully. He took a long drink from his glass before answering. "I've been dating Melissa for 3 months now," he said, referencing his current girlfriend, a brilliant law student I'd met briefly at a group dinner. "She's amazing on paper. Smart, beautiful, ambitious. Everyone thinks we're perfect together. But," I prompted when he fell silent. "But I don't feel what I think I'm supposed to feel," he admitted. "And it's not just with her. It's been the same with every relationship I've had. There's this disconnect. Like I'm going through the motions of what's expected rather than following what I actually want." I nodded encouragingly, recognizing the familiar struggle in his words, the conflict between societal expectations and personal truth that many go through during their coming-out journey. But I was careful not to project my own experience onto him. What do you think you want? I asked. Ryan's eyes met mine, and for a moment, the air between us seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. That's what I'm trying to figure out, he said softly. I've been having these thoughts, these feelings that don't fit with how I've always seen myself. The conversation had suddenly veered into territory I hadn't anticipated when he showed up at my door with beer and casual smiles. I felt a responsibility to navigate this carefully, to be supportive without making assumptions, to create space for his exploration without imposing my own interpretations. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? I assured him. No judgment here. He smiled, a genuine expression of gratitude that momentarily transformed his features. That's why I came to you, he said. You're the only person I know who might understand what I'm going through without making it a big deal. I couldn't help but feel touched by his trust, even as I reminded myself not to read too much into this conversation. Ryan might be questioning aspects of his sexuality, or he might simply be experiencing the kind of relationship doubts that everyone faces at some point. Either way, my role was to listen, not to hope for any particular outcome. As we continued talking, I noticed Ryan gradually moving closer on the couch. What had started as a respectable distance between friends had diminished to mere inches. I could smell his cologne, something woody and subtle that I'd always found appealing. When he reached for the whiskey bottle to refill our glasses, his arm brushed against mine, and I felt an electric current run through me at the contact. I silently chastised myself for the reaction. This wasn't about me or my long-buried feelings. This was about Ryan and whatever he was working through. Can I ask you something personal? Ryan said after a moment of comfortable silence. His voice had taken on a husky quality that I attributed to the late hour and the alcohol. Of course, I replied, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened in anticipation. He hesitated, taking another sip of whiskey before continuing. Have you ever been attracted to someone who didn't fit your usual type? Someone who maybe surprised you? The question seemed loaded with subtext, and I found myself choosing my words carefully. Definitely, I answered honestly. Attraction is complicated. Sometimes it's purely physical, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's about the connection you have with someone regardless of how they look or even their gender. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. I've been having these dreams, he said, his voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear him. Dreams about someone I never expected to think about that way. And when I wake up, I can't stop thinking about them, about what it might be like if. He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, but his eyes remained fixed on mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. I was acutely aware of how close we were sitting, of the slight flush on his cheeks that could be from the alcohol or from something else entirely. If, I prompted gently, my heart hammering in my chest. Instead of answering with words, Ryan's gaze dropped to my lips, just for a second, but long enough for the gesture to be unmistakable. Time seemed to slow down as he leaned forward slightly, hesitantly, giving me plenty of opportunity to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't pull away. His lips met mine in a kiss that was tentative at first, questioning, before deepening into something more certain. His hand came up to cup my face, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone with his athletic build. I found myself responding instinctively, years of suppressed attraction bubbling to the surface despite my better judgment. The kiss lasted only seconds before Ryan pulled back, his expression a mixture of wonder and confusion. I've been wanting to do that for months, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe longer. I just never had the courage. I stared at him, trying to process what had just happened and what it meant. Ryan, I began carefully. Are you sure about this? You've never shown any interest in men before. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as one of his nervous habits. I know how it looks, he said. Straight guy suddenly kissing his gay friend. Classic experimentation, right? There was a hint of bitterness in his tone. But it's not that simple. I've been questioning things for a while now, trying to understand why none of my relationships with women ever felt completely right. And you think it's because you might be attracted to men? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the hope fluttering in my chest. Maybe, he replied. Or maybe it's just you. Maybe it's always been you, and I've been too scared to admit it, even to myself. His words hit me with unexpected force. How many times had I imagined hearing something like this from him during those early years of our friendship? How many times had I dismissed those fantasies as impossible wishful thinking? And now here we were, The impossible suddenly possible, and I found myself paralyzed by uncertainty. Ryan, I said gently, I care about you too much to be an experiment. If this is just curiosity or confusion, that's okay, but I need you to be honest, with yourself and with me. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's fair, he acknowledged. And I don't have all the answers yet. But I know what I'm feeling isn't just curiosity. It's not something that came out of nowhere. I think it's something that's been there all along, and I've just been ignoring it because it was easier than facing what it might mean. I could relate to that struggle all too well. The resistance, the denial, the fear of what acknowledging your true feelings might mean for your identity and your future. So what happens now? I asked, aware that we were standing at a crossroads that would inevitably change our friendship, regardless of which path we chose. Ryan's smile was both nervous and hopeful. I don't know exactly, he admitted, but I'd like to find out. Not as some experiment, but as two people exploring something that feels real. If you're willing. The rational part of my brain warned me about the potential complications, the possibility that Ryan might eventually decide this wasn't what he wanted after all, the risk of losing our friendship if things went wrong. But there was another part of me, perhaps the part that had never fully let go of those early feelings, that couldn't walk away from this unexpected opportunity. I'm willing, I said finally. But we take it slow. Figure things out together. No pressure, no expectations. His relief was palpable. Slow sounds perfect. He agreed, reaching for my hand and intertwining our fingers. The simple gesture felt more intimate than the kiss we'd shared moments earlier, a promise, a beginning. We talked for hours after that, until the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside my window. Ryan shared stories of moments throughout his life when he'd felt attracted to men, but had dismissed those feelings as admiration or envy. He described the pressure he'd felt from his family and peers to fit a certain mold of masculinity, to date the right kind of women, to follow a predetermined path that never quite felt like his own. I shared my own journey of self-discovery, the challenges and joys of living authentically, the freedom that comes with embracing your true self despite the obstacles. As the conversation continued, I noticed a gradual change in Ryan's demeanor, a lightness, as if setting down a heavy burden he'd been carrying for years. His laughter came more easily, his gestures more relaxed and natural. It was like watching someone step out of a costume they'd been wearing for so long they'd forgotten it wasn't their real skin. When the morning finally arrived in earnest, Ryan reluctantly said he needed to leave for work. We stood at my door, both hesitant to end this transformative night. I don't regret coming over, he said, his eyes holding mine with newfound confidence. Even if I told myself I was just coming to talk. I smiled, recognizing the reference to his initial excuse. Your mouth definitely changed the subject, I teased, earning a laugh and another brief, sweet kiss. After he left, I sat on my couch, replaying the events of the night in my mind. I was acutely aware that we were at the beginning of something uncertain, potentially complicated. Ryan was still figuring himself out, still navigating the complex terrain of sexual identity. There would likely be challenges ahead, coming out to friends and family if he chose to do so, dealing with societal expectations, defining what this new relationship meant for both of us. But beneath that awareness was a current of hope, of possibility. Sometimes the most meaningful connections come when we least expect them, when we open ourselves to vulnerability and honest communication. Ryan and I had always had a strong foundation of friendship, of mutual respect, and genuine care for each other. Whatever happened next, that foundation would serve us well. In the weeks that followed, Ryan and I continued to explore this new dimension of our relationship. We had more conversations, sometimes serious, sometimes playful, always honest. We went on actual dates, rediscovering each other in this new context. Ryan ended things with Melissa, explaining that he needed time to figure himself out. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in LGBTQ+ issues, working through years of internalized expectations and assumptions about his identity. There were difficult moments, of course. Ryan's parents reacted with confusion and concern when he eventually told them he was dating me, though they didn't reject him outright. Some of his colleagues made insensitive comments when they found out, revealing biases he hadn't noticed before. There were times when Ryan himself struggled with doubt, with the weight of reshaping his understanding of who he was. But there were beautiful moments too. The first time he introduced me as his boyfriend to a group of friends, his face glowing with pride rather than fear. The night he told me he loved me, the words coming out easily, naturally, as if he'd been saying them all his life. The gradual integration of our lives, drawer space exchanged, keys shared, future plans discussed with growing confidence. I don't know what the future holds for us. Relationships are complex under the best circumstances, and ours began in unusual territory. But I do know that what started as a surprising confession on an ordinary Tuesday evening has evolved into something genuine and meaningful. Ryan is still discovering aspects of himself, still learning to navigate the world with this new understanding of his identity. And I'm learning, too, about patience, about the courage it takes to be vulnerable, about the unexpected ways love can find us when we're open to its possibilities. If there's a lesson in our story, perhaps it's this. The labels we assign ourselves and others are rarely as fixed as we imagine them to be. Human connection, whether friendship, love, or something in between, often transcends the categories we try to contain it within. And sometimes, the most profound conversations begin with someone showing up at your door, claiming they came just to talk, only to discover that their heart had something else entirely to say. Total _char_count, 18,748.